On this month's In the Life,
religion has been hijacked.
the fundamental fight.
They are now in my possession, and librarian, you're not getting them back.
And you wonder what's wrong with America?
I point the finger in their face and say, you helped this happen.
Homosexuality is responsible for the greatest epidemic in human history.
It is abnormal, wrong, and unnatural.
God has brought us here. It's wartime.
All this and more on In the Life, America's Gay and Lesbian News Magazine.
In the Life is funded in part by the H. Van Ameringen Foundation. Additional support provided by the Ford Foundation, the Gill Foundation, the Otto Haas Charitable Trust, the Overbrook Foundation, the Pride Foundation, the Ted Snowden Foundation, Daniel H. Renberg and Eugene Kapolowski, and the annual support of In the Life members like you.
Welcome to In the Life. I'm Cherry Jones.
And I'm David Marshall Grant. As the gay and lesbian civil rights movement has progressed, slowly accumulating rights and visibility, it has also begun to splinter into camps with divergent values and missions, throwing into doubt even the possibility of a homosexual agenda.
But no matter what goals and beliefs gay men and lesbians may hold, there still remains one great unifying condition. The religious right sees every one of us as an assault on their way of life. Many gay and lesbian Americans see the right's attempt to silence us as an assault on our very existence. And so, it seems, the gay and lesbian population and the religious right will forever be locked in some kind of political battle. This is a battle that In the Life was drawn into before it had even begun to air.
It seems that the broadcasting apologists are hiding behind Big Bird, Mr. Rogers, and Masterpiece Theater, laying down their quality smokescreen while they shovel out funding for gay and lesbian variety shows.
And the attacks on In the Life from the Senate floor were far from the last time public television would become the arena for the fundamental fight.
But let this filth come into our classrooms, that's fine. And you wonder what's wrong with America? You wonder what's wrong with America?
Who really cares if you're gay? It's like barely nobody knows in the world. It's like, what's the big whoop?
In 1992, my son was about to start public elementary school, and I started to be concerned about what kinds of messages he was going to be getting at school about the kind of family that he came from. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that what he was going to be exposed to in the official curriculum was going to be nothing. It was going to be silence, complete invisibility that gay and lesbian people existed.
Looking for a way to build understanding and tolerance among teachers and students, Deborah Chasnoff decided to make It's Elementary. Together with co-producer Helen Cohen, she embarked on a 4-year project.
We set out across the country and we found 6 schools, 4 public schools, 2 independent schools, where teachers were doing some kind of lesson that included an awareness of lesbian and gay people or anti-gay discrimination. And we took our cameras in to the classrooms and observed. We thought the contribution that we could make would be to demystify for people, for educators and parents, what it would actually look like if a 3rd grade teacher walked into the room and said, today we're going to talk about lesbians and gay men.
When I think of gay, I think of someone like working, a boy working funny, like a girl.
Once the film was completed, Chasnoff and Cohen traveled to 30 cities to screen and promote it.
People who were in the audiences of these big premieres got really excited and inspired, and they would say to us, I'm going to take this film to my son's school, and I'm going to sit down with the principal and make her watch this film. And they did.
There's a feeling of inspiration And I think you can't watch the film without feeling motivated to do something. And the response when teachers and parents see it is usually, what can we do here?
We need more documentaries like this. You know, this has changed my attitude towards what gay and lesbian people are feeling.
As word of the film spread, so did the press coverage.
Well, we were amazed. We kept getting, you know, feature story written about us, reviews written about us, and they were all incredibly positive, and I kept waiting. And then finally one day, somebody forwarded me something from some right-wing organization ranting and raving about this film. And then I would say in the fall of '97, it started coming, and it was a deluge.
The video is basically an infomercial for the homosexual agenda, and it's an infomercial for homosexual marriage.
Before we knew it, it seemed like It's Elementary had become the poster child for the religious right. We were what was wrong with America, and you should send your money now to stop It's Elementary.
As far as activists are concerned, the younger a child can be introduced to homosexuality, the better.
Schools are also promoting Gay and Lesbian Pride Month, as shown in this video, another resource for homosexual supporters to recruit sympathy from the children.
Amidst protests from conservative groups, the documentary aired on numerous PBS stations across the country. With It's Elementary reaching a greater audience through public television, reaction to the film intensified.
The Center for Reclaiming America has encouraged people all over America to contact their stations and request that they not show it. For those of us who are Christian conservatives, we have many issues that we fight. The two hot buttons that I particularly work on are abortion and the homosexual agenda.
One of the ways the right is responding to the broadcast of It's Elementary is by demanding that public television stations air a response program they produced called Suffer the Children.
The battle in this country between those holding to traditional morality and those espousing hedonism has reached a fever pitch.
To encourage debate, many public stations that aired It's Elementary also presented their own on-air discussion of the film.
What we did was to invite 7 parents into the studio who had never seen the program before, who came from different walks of life. They had different attitudes about what children should be taught in school, different religious attitudes, what they called different family values even, although what we found is that they shared a great deal in common, including the love that they had for their children.
Sitting next to somebody in class who is gay and finding out about it is not going to make you gay.
Just who decided that it's the business of the public school, in this case on teaching homosexuality as it was presented in that film?
What I heard was a promotion of tolerance, and I think that tolerance is a human value, it's a family value, it's a moral value.
My mothers mean so much to me. I have 2 mothers. 2 moms is pretty nice. Well, it's more than pretty nice, it's really nice.
I saw It's Elementary at a Concerned Women for America meeting. There were mothers in that room that were crying after that video because they were disturbed about what's happening to our children, that our children are being propagandized.
What we receive in public broadcasting is on the same day per program, somebody saying, I think this program is very conservative, I will no longer support you, and somebody saying this program is so flamingly liberal, I will no longer support you, and it's the identical program. So it does bespeak the diversity of the American people.
While It's Elementary aired on over 90 stations, it was not shown in over 20 states.
There's a great deal of sovereignty and independence per station, where every station makes its decision for the community.
We'll get one of those emails or one of those letters in the mail, and it's very upsetting. And then I just have to look over at the relative size of our hate mail and our fan mail and be reassured that the vast majority of people who have seen this film have been elated to see it and to say, what can we do about this so that our kids don't have to grow up the way we did?
All of the stuff that's written in the Torah, all of the stuff that's written in the ancient writings, all the stuff that's in the Talmud, it's in Hebrew. and it is required that it be interpreted. We started something called the Queer Jewish Think Tank. You look and you see where our place is. There's a little teeny phrase in Leviticus that is v'chai bahem, and it means live by them, meaning live by the laws. You're not supposed to die by them. You're not supposed to have suffer a little death every day because you've been ostracized from either your religion or you have to separate yourself from the person you love if it's the same sex. It's fluid, and it's meant to be interpreted every generation. So we're the new generation.
Fundamental fights crop up in neighborhoods across the country.
A young girl and her mother came to the library. They discovered the books on the shelf in the children's picture book section. The mother felt that they were totally inappropriate in a children's setting. She took the books to the children's librarian and complained. She did take the books, she checked them out, and took them to her minister.
As I looked at these books, I was outraged as a parent and as a citizen, even more so than a pastor, to think that my tax dollars were being used to purchase this kind of literature.
On Mother's Day, Dr. Jeffress delivered a televised sermon linking the two books to the biblical story of Sodom and Gomorrah.
God's word is clear. Homosexuality is an abomination in the sight of God. I want you to listen to this book, available in our library now. Page 1. My mommy and daddy got a divorce last year. Now there's somebody new at daddy's house. Being gay is just one more kind of love. And here are Daddy and Frank hugging one another. Daddy and his roommate are very happy together, and I'm happy too. These are the two copies that were out on the shelves. They are now in my possession, and librarian, you're not getting them back.
The sermon sparked a major controversy in the usually sleepy town of Wichita Falls. Confronted by Dr. Jeffress, librarian Linda Hughes decided to stick up for the books.
The mission of the public library is to serve everyone in the public. It's not to serve the majority. It's not to serve just a particular faction.
To support her position, Linda Hughes contacted the American Library Association Office of Intellectual Freedom and discovered that the books had already ignited firestorms similar to the one in Wichita Falls.
The problem is, if you put gay men and children in the same viewfinder, somebody is going to get terribly upset.
People who react very strongly to Heather Has Two Mommies in a negative way, I think feel that if their child reads this book or reads Daddy's Roommate just once, they're going to grow up to be gay. What I always tell people is when I was a child, I was an avid reader. I read thousands of books about heterosexual people, and one of those books changed my sexuality.
The books have been recommended by psychologists, by doctors, by teachers, and by librarians. And they've won awards as best children's books. I definitely feel they have a place in the collection of Wichita Falls.
With the support of the City Council, the librarian decided that for a 90-day trial period, the book should stay in the children's section, but be moved to a juvenile area with other books on sensitive topics. That decision made Dr. Jeffress even more determined to fight back.
If that librarian and that city council thinks we are going to bow down in gratitude and say, oh, thank you, thank you, thank you for taking these two books and moving them out from our younger children and moving them over to pollute the minds of our older children, they've got another thought coming.
As the controversy increased, city leaders denounced the attacks.
It divides the community, it divides our people. Whatever persuasion individuals are, they're still citizens of this city, and they still have rights. It's just like jumping on a group in our society that's not able to defend itself. And there are very few people who are going to come to the rescue of gays and lesbians without being splashed with the same paint.
This is the worst I have seen as far as this community is concerned. And it seems to be the issue of gays. We're going to ignore the gays. We're not going to give them any information whatsoever. We're not going to allow their children to have information about their lifestyle so that they can understand it. And that isn't fair.
The uproar has increased the visibility of some gays and lesbians in Wichita Falls, such as the outspoken pastor of the local Metropolitan Community Church.
Being lesbian mothers, we've had the book Heather Has Two Mommies in our home since before our son was born. We had him through artificial insemination, and we knew we were going to need an explanation of how he came about and where he came from. So the book has been a wonderful resource for us.
For kids, the books are simple. They show what it's like to grow up with gay or lesbian parents. But for adults, the books are symbols and pawns in a larger cultural war.
Many people seem to use the books Heather Has Two Mommies and Daddy's Roommates for their own political agendas.
I think many theologians and clergymen in the 20th century, they feel like they need a new crusade. And so gay men and lesbians are a very convenient target.
A, sodomy is against the law in the state of Texas. B, homosexuality is responsible for the greatest epidemic in human history. And C, homosexuality is an act that God has absolutely condemned.
If I could talk to Dr. Jeffries, I would invite him to my community and have him spend an afternoon with some lesbian families. I would say to him, I want you to look this child in the eye, and I dare you to say to this child, there's something wrong with your family.
When the story of the missing books hit the press, citizens began donating additional copies to the library.
We were suddenly flooded. Every day in the book drop, there were more and more and more. One gentleman ordered 5 copies of each from Amazon.com and had them delivered to us through the mail. We had started out with 2 copies, and then we had about 25 copies of each book before it was over with.
Well, the irony of it all is that when there's a big controversy about Heather Has Two Mommies in any community, book sales go up. There are probably lesbian moms in small towns all over the country that maybe would never have heard of the book, and now they can go and get it and read it to their children.
Some of us have children, and we have a right to have resources for those children, and we have the right to have them in our public library.
These are the purloined books. I would prefer that the books be removed completely, but I also am a reasonable person and would accept a compromise, and that is restricting these books to adult checkout only.
And some city council members seem inclined to agree.
If the parents want their children to read those books, fine. I have no problems with that. If parents don't want their children to read those books, that's fine too. That ought to be a solution.
Since there is no adult-only section, Daddy's Roommate and Heather Has Two Mommies would be the only restricted books in the entire Wichita Falls Library.
Anytime you are restricting access to information, you are censoring. It needs to be accessible without the intimidating factor of, I must ask for it at the desk. That is limiting the freedom of information.
90 days later, the books were returned to the children's section, where they have remained ever since.
Well, I say that there's a tremendous burden of moral responsibility and guilt on anybody who would presume to exclude sexual minorities from the kingdom of heaven. And any Christian who presumes to speak that invites divine wrath and retribution. The greater burden to be accounted for, it seems to me, in the life to come, will be exactly on those Christians who practice ministries of exclusion and discrimination and shunning. Now, the consequence of that for a lot of gay people is that they have been made spiritual orphans. They have been made to believe themselves unworthy of God's love, which I think is essential to gay health, a sense of gay worth, a sense of gay being as a creature of God.
In the name of religion, many communities attempt to enforce homophobic ideologies with laws and sometimes with violence. In certain Islamic countries, the punishment for gay men can be death. In Oregon, in 1992, the strategy took the form of Ballot Measure 9.
The Oregon Citizens Alliance, a conservative Christian group, proposed a constitutional amendment which declared homosexuality abnormal and perverse, banning its mention in government agencies and schools. The measure's supporters were fervent, in some cases to the point of violence.
You take sodomy, for example. If somebody's going to do that, it is dangerous, it is going to rip and tear, it's going to cause infections. I don't care what you say. And when you don't do things like that are not designed for your body, it is abnormal, wrong, and unnatural.
Heterosexual sex can be just as dirty, just as unclean, and you can catch the same diseases. What's your point?
I simply want to know who's next. Is it the blacks? Is it the Native Americans? Is it Catholics? Is it Mormons? Is it Jews? Is it people who are too tall or too fat?
Gore.
I want to know that are you going to whittle away everyone piece by piece until they're all just like you? Who is next?
The Catholic Church was very with the No on 9 side. In fact, Catholics voted 2-1 against the measure, which I think as a lesbian, you know, we think that certain people are our enemies and they don't accept us. But in this instance, you know, this proved not to be true.
The Archbishop of the Catholic Church of Oregon came out with a public statement on why Catholics should oppose Ballot Measure 9, and Saturday night I heard a noise, and then I came downstairs and the rectory was on fire, and they had broken into the church and spray painted all around the church. There was a lot of shock, tears, sadness, and anger. People in this community really understand, because in the 20s the Ku Klux Klan was very strong and managed to push law through to close the Catholic schools, and even went through to schools and churches looking for Catholics with guns, because they thought the Catholics had an agenda to take over the state. And so I think for the people here, especially the older people, they remember the cross burnings and some of the same kinds of things. And I know when they saw the graffiti on the rectory, it reminded them of the 20s.
The Northwest has a lot of neo-Nazi, white supremacist, skinhead kind of element in it. And they found Ballot Measure 9 and the language and the dialogue that was happening across the state an excuse to perpetrate violence.
I don't like trying to sleep with one eye open and one ear alert. I'm exhausted. I'm afraid.
Though Ballot Measure 9 garnered 43% of the vote in 1992, it did not pass. It was defeated again in both 1994 and 2000, but by narrower margins.
The first thing that people always tell me when they hear about being gay and Muslim is it's an oxymoron. The two can't ever go together in one way. And that's really sort of the struggle of gay Muslims all over the world, is that you have to pick one of these two identities. When I went off to school in Boston, Massachusetts, I was Brother Faisal Alam, you know, during the daytime. At night, going out and clubbing and hanging out with my friends. And those sorts of two lives really came crashing down in November of 1997, when I really just had a nervous breakdown. It was when I was in the hospital for about 2.5 weeks, when I said that I can't live these two dual lives anymore, and that I need to figure out how to bring the two together. And that's when sort of the process of trying to find out who else was out there began. So I sent out a message to Muslim student associations to find out if anyone else was also struggling with the issues of being gay and Muslim. Within minutes, you know, people had started subscribing to this internet listserv. And it was the first time that, to our knowledge, that people really had a safe forum to come together and talk about different issues.
Author Michelangelo Signorelli was one of the first writers to take note.
It's a testament to the power of the internet that perhaps one of the most underground subcultures imaginable, gay and lesbian Muslims, could come to the surface, and that people could organize and communicate globally.
Alam organized a 3-day-long retreat in Boston, Massachusetts. The retreat became the genesis of the organization.
The retreat's theme was Al-Fatiha, which comes from the first chapter of the Holy Quran, which is the holy book of Muslims. And Al-Fatiha means the opening or the beginning. So it became an appropriate title for the organization.
We asked 4 members of Al-Fatiha into our studio to talk about growing up gay and Muslim.
You know, if somebody just meets me, then they just assume that you're heterosexual, that you're conservative. Get a life. I'm a homosexual. I'm going to meet my boyfriend in a bar for a drink. Does that help you?
I believed in Islam. I believed in being right, and believed like I cannot deny myself something that I felt was very natural. When I had some friends who, when I came out to them, they're like, what about religion? I'm like, well, if God is saying if it's such a bad thing, then he would tell me why it's bad, and he would show me a way to stop it.
When I did finally come out and my parents, knew that I was gay, my relationship with my father was damaged beyond repair. A year later, I got a call from my mom asking if she could come live with me. I was in grad school. because my father had decided, since I was not going to, I'm an only son, and since I was not going to carry on the family name, that it was now his responsibility. At 70 years of age, decided that he was going to have an arranged marriage with another woman and produce more offspring.
I needed to come out. I absolutely needed it for myself, but in that cultural context, I don't think it's necessary. And I think, and I know others who are Moroccan from both sides of the family, and from devout families, they haven't had any problems. Their family knows. Islam says that all people who believe in one God are good people of the book. And my mom was Christian, so I was like, oh, at least she's okay. But whenever I listen to Christians talking about people who weren't Christian, it's like they're all going to hell. So I was like, well, you know, these two religions, like at least this, you know, Islam is a little bit broader and more open-minded. I feel more comfortable being in that religion and thinking both my parents are going to be okay than listening to what my mother's religion says and thinking my father's going to hell and so am I.
There has been, as in Christianity, one or two passages that are constantly used by various groups and blown up and deemed the word. And of course you see in Islam, just as in Christianity, other things that are in the Quran that tend to be ignored or decided upon as things that are no longer important.
Islam's interpretation has really been influenced by the culture in each country that it spreads to. So, and that really has a lot to do with sort of the treatment of gay people as well in Muslim countries.
Signorelli reported on how Islamic law is used to intimidate and oppress.
It is according to the Taliban's reading of Islamic law that homosexuals are to be put to death with a wall falling on them. In one of the cases that I was looking at, 3 men survived and were in the hospital with most of the bones of their bodies broken and were free to go after that because, according to Taliban law, somehow they were exonerated if their lives were spared by God. The official Taliban radio will announce it on the air and really make a big thing out of it and let people know that these people were put to death because of their homosexuality. Often will say that these people confessed.
In Egypt, while the death penalty isn't on the books, gay Muslims have been publicly humiliated, arrested, even tortured.
On May 11th, I began receiving emails from an anonymous man in Egypt. And he told a story about a police raid on a discotheque, which was rumored to be a gathering place for gay men, of dozens of men who had been arrested. At least 52 men had been held for months without charges being pressed, without the opportunity for bail. The Egyptian government decided that it needed to turn around and, as it were, throw a bone to fundamentalist forces. And the bone they threw took the form of the lives of 52 gay men.
They counted me because they needed a body.
23 of the Cairo 52 were convicted of contempt of religion and obscene behavior and sentenced to between 1 and 5 years hard labor.
These people are really being used as an example by the Egyptian government to again send a fear throughout the population. Islam is not universally a religion in which any country where people are predominantly Muslim will oppress homosexuals. It is about governments and what they do with religious law.
I think it's about compromising one aspect of your life versus the other, but creating new paths and creating new ways of practicing your Islam while still being gay. And Islam is a very community-oriented religion. Al-Fatiha has really helped me sort of create a new family and a new community. Not one individual, not one ideology has a monopoly over God. And I think a lot of gay religious groups, if you will, both gay Catholics, gay Buddhists, gay Muslims, have really understood that concept, that religion has been hijacked, and that in fact the root of all religious tradition and all religious faith is the notions of peace, love, and justice.
I'm Harvey Fierstein, and you're watching the Emmy-nominated gay and lesbian news magazine, In the Life.
Still to come on In the Life.
the gay movement is the spear point in the culture war against the Judeo-Christian value system.
There's hope for change, there's hope for change.
We are men, it is a man thing. Men must find and conquer.
We ask you to forgive us.
I'd never want to go back to not being a submitted woman.
Damn, this is just so serious.
I totally concur. The fundamental fight plays out on our televisions and ballots, in our libraries and classrooms, in our neighborhoods and governments. Groups like Exodus International and the Promise Keepers believe the true battle lies in an individual's soul. But because both groups maintain ideological and financial ties to the Christian right, some critics contend that this religious crusade is being fought for political purpose.
In June of 1997, conservative groups organized a conference in Georgetown entitled Homosexuality and American Public Life.
I believe myself that the gay movement is the spear point in the culture war against the Judeo-Christian value system.
The presenters of this conference, whether intentionally or not, are contributing to the climate of hostility and discrimination.
I believe in Christ, and I believe Christ has the power to change people.
Changing people from gay to straight through Jesus Christ is the mission of Exodus International, whose members were among those attending the conference. John Polk, a former drag queen, is Exodus vice president.
We have 85 agencies in the United States and in several foreign countries. And in our 22-year history, over 200,000 people have contacted Exodus agencies for help and information.
While the Exodus numbers seem formidable, the percentage of people who change from gay to straight is highly questionable.
We don't keep statistical data like that. We believe change is a process, and a person will start at point A and they will move towards point B. As soon as a person has made one step away from point A, they've changed.
Psychotherapist Richard Cohen specializes in sexual reorientation. Once gay and now married with children, Cohen wrote a children's book to tell people his story.
I wrote Alfie's Home to let children, teens, adults, educators, and therapists know that the possibility of changing from homosexual to heterosexual exists.
The book tells the story of Alfie, who grows up thinking he might be gay.
My Uncle Pete comes over sometimes. He lives with us every now and then. He's really kind to me, holding me, listening to me, and making me feel loved. One night when he was holding me, he started touching my private parts. When I became a teenager, I started feeling really different from the other guys. After a while, I went to a counselor for help and advice. I told him my story and that I thought I was gay. He said I wasn't gay. I just missed my dad's love and was taught wrong things by my uncle.
My belief is that homosexuality originates in unresolved childhood trauma, and therefore homosexual feelings and desires are merely symptoms of these wounds.
Cohen is a member of the National Association for Research and Therapy of Homosexuality.
It's an organization of professionals who believe that there is an etiology to homosexuality and therefore it can be changed.
That organization, as we understand it, is founded in the position that homosexuality is a mental disorder.
In 1973, the American Psychiatric Association removed homosexuality from its Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. 2 years later, the American Psychological Association passed a resolution supporting this decision.
I think the APAs, both, have done a tremendous disservice to science and to the homosexual community by taking out the diagnosis based on political pressure, not scientific research.
To say that there was no scientific basis is absurd. There has been a substantial body of research beginning in the late 50s with Evelyn Hooker's groundbreaking research that has consistently shown over and over again, if you compare a group of lesbian, gay, and bisexual people to an appropriate control group on any number of measures of psychological well-being, mental health, social adjustment, etc., you find no differences.
Exodus International held its annual conference in Wilmore, Kentucky, attracting 800 participants from all over the country. Almost 30 years after Stonewall and 24 years after the APA decision, what makes thousands of people so unable to face their lives as gay men and lesbians?
I sought help to change or to get fixed because I grew up believing that it was a sin and that it needed to be changed.
As I started reading the Bible from beginning to end, cover to cover, it became overwhelmingly clear to me that in God's creative intent, that He did not mean for me to be homosexual. And so that made a lot of sense to me, and that's when I discovered Exodus in 1987. And I had never heard that a homosexual could change. I thought the only way that you could escape homosexuality was through death.
There's a secret some don't.
In late 1996, Outpost Ministries in Minneapolis produced this commercial, which aired during the historic Ellen Coming Out episode.
There's hope for change, there's hope for change.
If you're gay or lesbian and don't want to be, there's hope for change. Many have left the lifestyle. You can too.
I think that telling someone that there's an option to change is giving them false hope. I mean, there's certainly always the option to live contrary to how you feel and to who you are, and I think there's plenty of people doing that.
For 5 years, Jeff Ford was one of these people.
I tried everything. I mean, I read every book, I went to every conference, I went through, with my wife, you know, numerous different kinds of therapy, and believe I really gave it a fair shot over a 5-year period of time.
After falling in love with his reparative therapy partner, who now remains his life partner after 9 years, Ford decided he no longer believed in the process.
I went to the board of directors at Outpost and Exodus and told them that I wasn't healed, that I was struggling with same-sex fantasies, that I had indeed been sexually active a couple of times while I'd been director of the ministry, and I didn't believe in this anymore.
While many become spiritually disillusioned after Exodus, there are those who maintain their faith.
I still believe that I'm a Christian. My views have certainly changed. I don't know that I can say that one way is particularly the right way or the only way.
As lesbian and gay rights continues to make headway in America, the religious right has found a new ally, the ex-gay movement.
It comes as no surprise to us that the religious right has become far more invested in this process.
The Christian right seems to be more willing to put a little bit of money into these ministries, and I fear exploit them to then say, hey, thousands of people are able to be healed and changed, therefore we don't need laws to protect gays, and therefore you know, it's not fair to say that this is a orientation.
We're here, we're ex-queer, get used to it.
I support you being happy, and I support all the ex-gays being happy, because it's not, everyone's not gay.
And I believe that you are happy now, but if it ever comes the day that you're 32, 35 years old, and you haven't found this right, just know that we exist and that we're here to help you. We're not here to hurt you.
If you provide a promise for change, and you're changing as many people as possible, what you're ultimately trying to do is to get rid of a minority culture. All you have to do is look at history to know that there have been a number of movements and leaders who have attempted to annihilate a race or culture.
On September 19, 2000, author Wayne Besson photographed John Park, the ex-gay vice president of Exodus International, in the Washington, D.C. gay bar, Mr. P's. Though he claimed he'd only stopped in to use the restroom, he was fired from his position at Focus on the Family. Park has since been rehired.
Promise Keepers is a Christian outreach to men, primarily through stadium conferences and ongoing small groups. Promise Keepers encourages men to live godly lives and keep to 7 promises. It was a show of strength as nearly 500,000 men flocked to the mall in Washington, D.C. for the Stand in the Gap rally. In the Life was also there to find out who the Promise Keepers are and why political progressives seem so concerned about this increasingly popular group.
I think it's very fitting that we go to our nation's capital and make a statement of humility there, right in the power source, where we have no agenda.
Listen to God's word. Obey your leaders and submit to their authority.
Promise Keepers is a major project of the leadership of right-wing religious organizations to create a men-only movement to further their political and social agenda.
Let us change history in our nation today. Let us change history in our world today.
The Promise Keepers are just the hottest religious right marketing tool since televangelism.
This charge that the Promise Keepers are not just religious, but the newest face of the religious right, was pointed at the leaders of conservative connections.
Well, we see that the leadership of the Promise Keepers is closely linked with many right-wing groups. The men who are coming may or may not be aware of those linkages, and we want to make them aware. For instance, Focus on the Family is the parent group of Family Research Council, a group they spun off to do overtly political lobbying and election of right-wing people. Now Family Research Council is welcoming the Promise Keepers to town at the airport. They have placards on all the Washington Times newspaper stands. They had a 4-page spread in yesterday's Washington Times. We think that the leadership here has clear links with the right.
Another group studying the links between the Promise Keepers and the religious right is New York's Center for Democracy Studies.
The Center for Democracy Studies was set up about a year ago to undertake in-depth research into threats to our democratic values here and abroad.
God has brought us here to prepare us. Let's proceed. It's wartime.
Promise Keepers is bending over backwards to pretend that they're not political. But of course, Coach McCartney, who founded and still leads the movement, has a long track record of extreme right-wing politics. He was on the advisory board of Colorado for Family Values, which backed the homophobic Colorado Initiative. Bill Bright's $300 million a year Campus Crusade for Christ and Pat Robertson's Christian Coalition are major supporters of Promise Keepers.
And Coach, it's great to have you back on the 700 Club.
Not only are all its founders and leaders activists in extreme right-wing politics, but when they came to choosing their national spokesman, who did they pick? Mark DeMoss, who's had a long career supporting Jerry Falwell, and most recently he was on the letterhead of the Pat Buchanan for President campaign as a member of his advisory committee.
In the Life recently spoke to Mark DeMoss over the phone. What is the Promise Keepers' current position on homosexuality?
We would take the position that homosexuality, according to biblical reference, would be wrong.
This sentiment was echoed back on the mall.
2 gay men would be welcome. Their sin would not be welcome.
But keep in mind, as human beings, we are all sinners, okay? So we can help the lesbian community, we can help the homosexual community through Christ.
Helping the homosexual through Christ means changing from gay to straight.
We have 20 people from Ex-Gay Ministry, Exodus International. We're the local DC chapter, Transformation Ex-Gay Ministries. We're here to let our gay brothers and sisters know at National Organization of Women that this is a lie, that you can recover from homosexuality, number one. Number two, Promise Keepers has been very friendly to us. They have given us scholarships to come to their conference.
Why were ex-gay people given scholarships to stand in the gap?
There was no fee to attend Stand in the Gap, so in that sense there were not scholarships. There may have been some travel stipends made available.
Promise Keepers has embraced us. They disagree with the gay lifestyle, but they love homosexuals, and they have loved us into healing.
While gay men are being encouraged to sacrifice while being gay, women are being asked to make another sacrifice.
Sit down with your wife and say something like this. Honey, I've made a terrible mistake. I've given you my role, and now I must reclaim that role. I'm not suggesting you ask for your role back. I'm urging you to take it back.
I'd never want to go back to not being a submitted woman.
Some question.
It's going to probably change a lot of things at my household. This submission thing's a big thing.
Some apologize.
And we need you. We ask you to forgive us for not showing you respect and the honor you deserve.
And many, as in this gathering of 30,000 Promise Reapers, surrender. But what the Promise Keepers assert is that what they're really about is asking men to change. Openly lesbian journalist Donna Minkowitz agrees.
I mean, one thing that I don't think a lot of feminists have looked at is they're actually encouraging men to give up a lot of the ways this culture teaches them to be men in some really wonderful ways. I mean, they're telling men, you know what, it's important to work on your relationships. You know what, it's okay to have feelings, and you don't need to dominate every situation and dominate the people in your lives. And that's a big deal. It's actually very far from traditional masculinity.
While some of the changes the Promise Keepers seek may be valuable, progressives remain concerned.
I fault the leadership of the Promise Keepers and the backers and initiators of this anti-lesbian and gay, anti-woman group for exploiting some legitimate needs that men on this mall have.
Coach McCartney recently gave an interview in which he said our Constitution must not be in violation of God's law. How does he interpret God's law?
On January the 1st, the year 2000, when the churches stand together and testify that the men are fully involved and that everything's in order, Promise Keepers is going to turn and go globally.
But until then, now would like men to adopt a different set of promises.
I promise to respect women's equality and reject calls for women to submit to male authority. I promise to uphold women's rights, including the rights to abortion and to be free of male violence, and to support civil rights for all, including people of color, lesbians and gays, and religious freedom for all.
Promise Keepers claims to have recruited over 5 million men to its conferences since 1990.
There was a black gay man, a writer, director of AIDS films, and his name was Donald Woods. And he actually had died of AIDS. And his family actually at the funeral didn't want to say that was what he had died of. It was a time of great tension because a lot of black gay men were dying. There was a poet, Asado Saint. He stood up at the funeral and he marched down to the pulpit, and he was uninvited, and he slammed his hand on the podium, and he said Donald Woods was a black gay man, and he died of AIDS. I think that will always go down in history that Asado told the truth, and it was a beautiful moment. I'm Pamela Sneed, and you're watching In the Life.
The Promise Keepers' mission relies on a definition of masculinity that forges their interpretation of Christianity with gender codes far too rigid to tolerate homosexuality.
According to the late filmmaker Marlon Riggs, sexuality and gender identity are further complicated in the African American community by the historic and political burdens of race. In his last film, Black Is, Black Ain't, leading critical thinkers explore the dimensions that race adds to homophobia in Black America.
Black manhood, black masculinity, historical sore spots. For centuries, American culture had regarded us as playful eunuchs, laughing, singing, sambos, childlike in our disposition, while black women were seen as strong, and often because of this, unwomanly. Our men were considered weak. Is there any wonder, then, that when black men finally achieved public voice, the top priority was restoring what society had repeatedly stolen from us?
To be a black man required this code of silence. You didn't express feelings. You weren't hurt. You couldn't acknowledge hurt and pain and rage and anger. And what that engendered was silence. No one talked to each other. Because that would have been admitting vulnerability, and vulnerability was associated with being feminine.
Black masculinity, black manhood. Isn't that ultimately what it became all about? The redemption of an emasculated male identity.
When we
we translate the history of black oppression sexually, especially through the writings of George Jackson, Eldridge Cleaver, it's all sexualized into emasculation and castration. So the reclamation of the black race gets translated into it's a dick thing. That's why I'm fond of saying if the black thing is really a dick thing in disguise, we're in serious trouble. Because it is like a kind of worship of the phallus.
So you can buy into the popular stereotypes and run around holding your dick and thinking you gotta everything in sight to prove that you are a man, to prove that you have that stamina and that virility and you're not to be with.
We are men. All men do it. We have to do it. We are men. It is a man thing. Men must find and conquer as much as they can get. Do not think for 2 seconds that you don't.
That's why, for example, Eddie Murphy's Raw fascinated me. So, I mean, when he says, you know, in that film that a woman doesn't want to hear that you love her, she wants to know that you will her to death, and he's doing that, you know. And in the audience, when I saw that black men were giving black power salutes, and I was thinking, damn, this is just so serious. This idea that, you know, we need to reclaim the space of that erect, brutalizing phallus as our identity as a people.
Many people would say that I'm not a member of the black community. In fact, many of the people who are viewing this would say, she says she's a lesbian? Oh no, that doesn't cut it. But the thing is, I know I'm a part of the black community in every single way that is important.
It's obvious because of our sexuality. We've been treated as outcasts. To be gay or to be lesbian is not to be black. To be black is to be heterosexual.
This idea that somehow my blackness is diminished because I love a man, it's purely out of that sense that black men have been chatteled, black men have been lynched, black men have been shot, beaten, brutalized by the police, the government, every which way, etc. So that some people view black homosexuality as the final break in masculinity.
How do we keep ourselves together as a people in the face of all our differences? How do we maintain a sense of communal selfhood, if you will? Who's in the community and who's not? I mean, there's been a history of excluding other black folk from community in this country to the detriment, I think, of our empowerment as an overall people.
Next month on In the Life, the body politic. The changing image of AIDS. Girls just want to have fun.
It went beyond tennis, it went beyond sports. It really, I think, empowered women in a way that Gloria Steinem couldn't imagine.
And the old ball game.
I'd rather do it with a guy, but when all is said and done, Kippy, I'd rather just play ball.
And finally, writer Paul Rudnick sits in for In the Life regular Harvey Fierstein.
Following the terrorist attacks in New York, Washington, and Pennsylvania, Jerry Falwell made the following statement.
I really believe that the pagans and the abortionists and the feminists and the gays and the lesbians who are actively trying to make that an alternative lifestyle, the ACLU, People for the American Way, all of them who tried to secularize America, I point the finger in their face and say, you helped this happen.
His host on CBN 700 Club, Pat Robertson, replied,
I totally concur.
Both men later apologized for their remarks without quite retracting them. These guys are not only repulsive, they're truly nuts. They still love that phrase, alternative lifestyle, which always sounds like a retirement community in Florida. And those pagans and feminists, what about the Pink Ladies or the Olsen twins? The immediate outcry against Jerry and Pat seemed to stun them, at least for a moment. Jerry later said on his website that, quote, in retrospect, I should have mentioned the national sins without mentioning the organizations and persons by name. So being gay is now a national sin. Who chooses these sins? Is it like selecting a national anthem or a state bird? Jerry also said that he, quote, had no intention of being divisive. What was he after? A thank you note? A big warm hug? Here's the only possible apology that could really make a difference. I propose that Jerry and Pat get married to each other on a very special broadcast. Then all will be forgiven. I'd even throw rice. Well, I'd throw something. Amen.
I'm Cherry Jones.
And I'm David Marshall Grant. From all of us at In the Life here at the Millennium Broadway Hotel in New York, thank you for watching, and we'll see you next month.
In the Life is funded in part by the H. Van Ameringen Foundation. Additional support provided by
the Ford Foundation, the Gill Foundation, the Otto Haas Charitable Trust, the Overbrook Foundation, the Pride Foundation, the Ted Snowden Foundation, Daniel H. Renberg and Eugene Kapolowski,
and the annual support of In the Life members like you.